The Apache warrior said, "Don't take my sister, take me. I can do anything you want." The sun rose slowly over the mountains, spreading golden light across the valley where Tayan's village lay. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine trees and the soft murmur of a river that wound its way through the settlement. Birds sang in the early morning, and the village, though small, was alive with the sounds of life. Children laughed as they ran across the open fields, women gathered water from the river, and men prepared for the day's work. Among them moved Tayan, a young Apache warrior, known for his strength, his calm mind, and the fierce loyalty he held for his family and people. Tayan's life had always been tied to the rhythm of the village and the mountains surrounding it. Every morning, he rose before dawn, performing the rituals his elders had taught him, feeling the presence of the spirits that guided his people. He walked silently through the village, observing the world waking up. His eyes often fell on his younger sister, Ahioka, who was already running around, her laughter echoing through the crisp morning air. She was a bright spark, full of curiosity and energy, always exploring, always asking questions. Tayan smiled, knowing that she had the same fire he saw in the mountains themselves, a spirit that could not be tamed. He remembered the stories their father had told them about their ancestors, warriors who had faced danger and hardship with courage. The lessons were clear: protect your family, respect the land, honor your people, and never give in to fear. Tayan carried these lessons with him every day, not as burdens but as guides for living. He felt a deep responsibility for Ahioka, not because it was his duty alone, but because he loved her fiercely. She had been through nothing of true hardship yet, but Tayan knew the world outside their mountains could be cruel and unpredictable. That morning seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Tayan noticed the usual sounds of the forest and the village, yet there was a subtle tension in the air he couldn't ignore. Perhaps it was the way the wind shifted through the trees, carrying an unfamiliar scent, or the way the distant hills looked sharper against the sky, as if hiding secrets. Something inside him stirred, a sense of caution that he could not shake. He continued his routine, helping elders with small tasks, checking on the animals, and offering guidance to the younger warriors. But his mind kept returning to Ahioka, her safety, and the feeling that the world beyond their home might soon knock at their door. Ahioka noticed her brother's thoughtful gaze and skipped over to him, her small hands brushing against his arm. "Tayan, come play," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "Let's run to the river and see who can jump the farthest." Her energy was contagious, and Tayan chuckled, finally allowing himself a moment of lightness. For a few minutes, they ran together through the fields, laughing and challenging each other. Tayan marveled at her spirit, so free, so unafraid, and he felt a deep desire to protect it at all costs. But even as they played, the subtle sense of unease in Tayan's heart grew stronger. He walked Ahioka back to the small hut they shared with their parents, making sure she was safe and ready for the day. Inside, the smell of breakfast filled the air: cornmeal porridge, fresh bread, and herbs gathered from the mountains. Their mother smiled warmly at them, noticing Tayan's protective presence, but she did not press him about the worry he clearly felt. She knew the signs of a warrior's intuition and understood that some feelings could not be easily explained. After breakfast, Tayan joined the other men of the village. The elders gathered them in a circle, discussing the tasks of the day, the hunting routes, and the maintenance of the village's defenses. There was a calm, structured rhythm to the meeting, and Tayan felt the grounding force of community around him. Yet, even as he listened, he could not ignore the tension that had settled in his chest. He scanned the horizon, his eyes catching movement in the distant trees that seemed out of place. Though nothing concrete had happened yet, his instincts whispered that danger was approaching, and he needed to be ready. By midday, the village continued its routines, but rumors had begun to stir. A traveler had passed nearby the day before, speaking of strangers moving through the valleys, capturing people for unknown reasons. The elders dismissed it at first, calling it the tales of a worried stranger, but the seed of fear was planted. The children were sent to play closer to the village center, and the adults became more alert. Tayan moved among his people, reassuring them with his calm presence while preparing himself for the unknown. Every action he took was guided by the thought of Ahioka and the vow he had silently made to keep her safe. As the afternoon sun climbed high, the sound of the distant wind changed. It carried a weight, a feeling of unease that was almost tangible. Tayan's muscles tensed, and he signaled to a few trusted warriors to keep watch from the higher hills. Ahioka, curious as ever, followed him with questions, but he gently reminded her to stay close. She pouted briefly but obeyed, sensing the seriousness in her brother's tone. Tayan felt the gravity of his role pressing down on him, not just as a warrior, but as a protector, someone who might be called to face danger on behalf of his family and his people. By late afternoon, the first signs of trouble appeared. From the forest edges, shadows moved differently than they should, and the smell of smoke hinted at fires burning beyond what was normal for the season. The elders gathered quickly, their faces etched with worry, and the villagers began to prepare for the possibility of attack. Tayan's heart raced, but he remained calm, thinking through every possibility. He guided the women and children to safer spots and helped secure the village's most vulnerable areas. Every step, every decision, was made with Ahioka in mind. Her safety was paramount, and he would not allow anything to threaten her. Evening came, and the sky turned shades of orange and purple. Tayan stood at the edge of the village, watching the forest and hills beyond, feeling the weight of responsibility like never before. Ahioka appeared at his side, holding his hand with a trust so complete it almost brought tears to his eyes. He looked down at her and whispered softly, "Whatever comes, I promise I will protect you. Nothing will hurt you as long as I can stand and fight." She nodded, not fully understanding the danger but sensing his determination. That night, as the village settled under the starry sky, Tayan could not sleep. He kept a silent watch, listening to the sounds of the forest, preparing himself for the storm he knew was coming. And so, the calm before the storm ended with Tayan standing as a silent guardian, fully aware that the peaceful life of his village might be shattered at any moment. He did not yet know the form that danger would take, but he understood one thing clearly. He would face it with courage, and above all, he would protect his sister. His love for Ahioka, his sense of duty, and his warrior spirit intertwined to form a resolve that could not be broken. This was the beginning of a journey that would test him in ways he had never imagined, but Tayan was ready to stand, unwavering, against whatever came. The morning after Tayan's quiet watch arrived with a strange stillness. The birds were silent and the usual chatter of the village seemed muted. Tayan sensed it immediately, a heaviness in the air, like the calm right before a storm. His heart beat faster, yet his steps were steady as he moved through the village, checking on families and offering a reassuring smile wherever he could. But inside, he felt a knot of unease. Something was coming, and it would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. Ahioka, unaware of the looming danger, ran up to him holding a small basket of wildflowers she had picked. "Tayan, look, aren't they pretty?" she said, her eyes sparkling with joy. Tayan knelt beside her and smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They are beautiful, Ahioka," he said softly, "just like you, but stay close to me today, okay? I want to make sure nothing happens to you." She nodded, sensing his serious tone, though she did not fully understand why he was so concerned. She trusted him completely, and that trust gave Tayan both strength and a deeper sense of responsibility. By midday, whispers had begun to ripple through the village. Some villagers had spotted strangers moving through the distant hills, and the descriptions were unsettling. These were not travelers like the ones who occasionally passed through. They were armed, organized, and purposeful. The elders gathered in a huddle, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces were lined with worry, and Tayan could hear the unspoken fear in their voices. The strangers were coming closer, and the village might not be able to withstand them without careful planning. Tayan listened intently, absorbing every detail. He noticed the fear in the eyes of the children and the tension in the villagers' movements. He knew he had to act, not only to protect his sister but to guide the village through the uncertainty. He approached the elders with a calm determination. "We must prepare," he said firmly. "We cannot wait for them to reach us. We need to secure the children, the elders, and our supplies. We need to be ready, whatever comes." The elders nodded, grateful for his guidance. Tayan's words brought a sense of order amid growing panic. The villagers began moving with urgency. Women gathered children and led them to safer areas closer to the center of the village, while men reinforced barriers around the outskirts. Tayan stayed close to Ahioka, holding her hand as he moved. She asked questions about the strangers and why the village was acting differently. He answered as best as he could, careful not to frighten her unnecessarily. "Sometimes people don't understand the ways of others," he said gently. "We must stay strong and watchful. That is all we can do." As the afternoon wore on, the first signs of the strangers' arrival became visible. Dust rose on the distant trails, and the occasional shout carried faintly across the valley. Tayan's instincts told him that these were not simple travelers or hunters. They were searching for something, or someone. He positioned himself on a small hill near the village edge, giving him a clear view of the approaching group. Ahioka stayed close, clutching his arm, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Tayan whispered words of reassurance to her, reminding himself to remain calm, because any panic from him could ripple through the village. The strangers arrived by mid-afternoon, moving swiftly and deliberately. Tayan watched as they split into small groups, surrounding the village with an air of authority and threat. Their presence was intimidating, yet Tayan refused to show fear. He knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. He called quietly to the few trusted warriors in the village, signaling that they must stay ready to protect the people, but not to confront the strangers directly unless absolutely necessary. Strategy and patience were as important as strength. It did not take long for the strangers to approach the village center, where elders and villagers had gathered. One of them, taller than the rest and with a commanding presence, stepped forward. Tayan could see the authority in his posture and the cold calculation in his eyes. He spoke in a firm, demanding voice, announcing that the villagers must comply with their instructions and hand over anyone they sought. The villagers murmured in fear, unsure of how to respond. Some looked to the elders, who remained composed but tense, while others glanced at Tayan, silently asking for guidance. Tayan stepped forward, positioning himself between the strangers and the villagers. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. His eyes met the leader's, and he spoke firmly, but respectfully. "Do not take anyone from this village without my consent. My people are under my protection." The strangers looked at him with a mixture of surprise and amusement. They had not expected such boldness from a young warrior. The leader's eyes narrowed, assessing Tayan, testing the limits of his courage. It was then that the most difficult moment arrived. One of the strangers singled out Ahioka, stepping toward her with an air that made Tayan's blood run cold. In an instant, he moved in front of her, his body shielding her from view. His heart pounded, but his voice remained steady, filled with determination. "Do not take my sister," he said firmly, looking directly at the leader. "Take me instead. I can do anything you want. But leave her unharmed." The villagers gasped, stunned by Tayan's selflessness and bravery. Even Ahioka's eyes widened, not fully understanding the gravity of her brother's words. The leader paused, clearly taken aback by Taeyeon's offer. He had expected fear, submission, perhaps even bargaining, but not a willing sacrifice. For a moment, silence fell over the village, broken only by the wind rustling through the trees. Taeyeon stood tall, unwavering, showing that he would face any challenge, endure any hardship, and give everything to protect his sister. His courage was undeniable, and it created a ripple of hope and admiration among the villagers. They saw not only a protector but a leader, someone who would stand in the face of danger without hesitation. After what felt like an eternity, the leader nodded slowly. He gestured to his companions, signaling that they would take Taeyeon as he had offered. The tension in the village eased slightly for a moment, but fear remained, for the situation was far from over. Taeyeon turned to Ahioka, kneeling briefly to meet her gaze. "Stay strong," he whispered. "I will return. No harm will come to you." She clung to him tightly, feeling a mixture of fear, confusion, and pride. She knew her brother was brave, but she had never seen him risk so much before. His actions left a mark on her heart that would last forever. As Taeyeon was led away, he walked steadily, maintaining the dignity and resolve that had defined him. Every step was a silent promise to protect his family and his people, even in the unknown and perilous circumstances ahead. The villagers watched in silence, holding on to hope that his courage and wisdom would guide him through the dangers that awaited. Ahioka remained at the center of the village, her heart heavy but her faith in her brother unshaken. She clutched the flowers she had picked earlier, a small reminder of the innocence and beauty he had vowed to protect. The journey away from the village was long and filled with uncertainty. Taeyeon observed his captors carefully, studying their movements and behavior, looking for any opportunity to ensure Ahioka's safety. Though he was now in the hands of the strangers, he refused to feel helpless. His mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and plans. Every decision mattered, not only for his survival but for the promise he had made to his sister. His courage was not blind. It was informed by experience, intuition, and the unwavering bond he shared with Ahioka. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Taeyeon found a brief moment to reflect. He thought of his family, the village, and the life he had known. The fear was present, but it was balanced by determination. He understood that courage was not only in facing danger, but in making choices for the greater good, in protecting the innocent even at personal risk. And he knew that this moment, this choice, would define him forever. Taeyeon's story was just beginning, but the foundation of his character, his bravery, loyalty, and love, was already unshakable. The path away from the village was long and uneven, winding through dense forests and rocky hills. Taeyeon walked with measured steps, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. Though the strangers had the upper hand, he refused to appear weak. Every fiber of his being was focused on one goal: to survive, to endure, and to find a way back to Ahioka and the people he loved. His mind was sharp, calculating possible opportunities, while his heart remained steady with courage. The strangers themselves were a constant presence, watching him closely, making sure he did not attempt to escape. They whispered among themselves in a language he did not understand, their gestures sometimes threatening, sometimes curious. Taeyeon paid attention to everything, their patterns, their habits, even the smallest details. He knew that understanding them was the first step in outsmarting them. He also understood that his own patience and self-control were as important as any physical skill he possessed. Night fell, and the forest around him became a world of shadows and soft sounds. Owls called in the distance, and the rustle of small animals echoed through the underbrush. Taeyeon found a moment to rest, sitting against a tree while keeping a watchful eye on the strangers. Sleep was difficult, but he allowed himself short moments of rest, knowing that exhaustion could make him careless. He thought of Ahioka, her trusting eyes and innocent smile, and the promise he had made to her. That thought strengthened him, reminding him why he must endure. The strangers led him to a camp, a clearing surrounded by rough logs and low fires. Other captives were there, men, women, and even a few children, all looking frightened and unsure of what was to come. Tayan studied them carefully, recognizing the fear in their faces, the uncertainty in their eyes. He knew he had to remain composed, both for himself and as an example to others. His courage could inspire them, give them hope that not all was lost. For a moment, he offered a small smile to a young boy huddled by a fire, and the boy returned it with a flicker of trust. Tayan knew that even in darkness, hope could survive. The days that followed were grueling. The strangers tested Tayan's endurance with long marches, demanding tasks, and careful observation. They sought to break him, to see if he would submit. Yet, every test became an opportunity for Tayan to measure himself, to understand their weaknesses and to keep his mind sharp. He observed their routines, the times they rested, the way they guarded the camp, and the subtle ways they interacted with each other. Every detail was a puzzle, and he treated it as such, knowing that knowledge was as valuable as strength in moments like this. Even in the harshness of captivity, Tayan never let despair take hold. He remembered the teachings of his elders. Courage was not simply fighting, it was enduring, surviving, and protecting what mattered most. Each day, he silently repeated to himself that he would return to Ahioka, that he would see the village again, and that he would fulfill the promise he had made. That inner resolve became his shield, allowing him to face hunger, fatigue, and the watchful eyes of his captors without breaking. Occasionally, the strangers tested his skills, giving him tasks that were physically demanding or mentally challenging. They expected him to fail, to show signs of weakness, but Tayan approached each task with focus and determination, demonstrating his resilience. His movements were precise, his decisions thoughtful, and his strength unwavering. Even when his body ached and his energy waned, he never lost his composure. He became a figure of respect, even in the eyes of those who had hoped to intimidate him. They began to see not just a captive, but a warrior whose spirit could not be crushed. In quieter moments, Tayan found ways to observe the surrounding landscape. He studied the forest paths, the rivers, and the hills. He noted hidden spots that could be useful for escape, places where he could hide or move undetected. His mind was constantly working, planning not recklessly, but carefully, preparing for a moment when opportunity might present itself. Every observation, every small detail, was a piece of a larger strategy, one that could ultimately lead him back to Ahioka and his village. There were moments of reflection as well. Tayan thought about his life before captivity, the laughter of Ahioka, the smell of breakfast in the morning, the songs of the elders by the fire. These memories were a source of strength, reminding him of what he was fighting for. He realized that even in the face of fear, love could be a guiding force. It was his love for Ahioka, his sense of duty to his family and his people, that made him stronger than any chains or threats the strangers could place upon him. One evening, the strangers held a council of their own, speaking in hushed voices while Tayan watched from a distance. Though he could not understand their words, he observed their gestures, their expressions, and the tension in their bodies. He began to piece together clues about their intentions and their plans. Knowledge, he knew, was power. By understanding them, he could anticipate their actions and find the best moments to act. Every subtle detail became a tool in his growing strategy for survival. The challenges were not only physical but also emotional. Tayan felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him constantly. He was alone, far from home, facing a situation that could easily end in tragedy. But instead of succumbing to fear, he turned it into resolve. He reminded himself daily of the promise he had made to Ahioka, of the trust the villagers had placed in him, and of the warrior spirit he carried within him. These thoughts became a source of courage that could not be extinguished by threats or hardship. As days turned into nights and nights into weeks, Tayan slowly began to gain small advantages. He learned the routines of the strangers, finding moments when they were less vigilant, when their guard dropped. He observed patterns in their movements and behaviors, noting the times when he could safely explore the surrounding areas or even communicate quietly with other captives. Each small victory, each piece of knowledge gained, built his confidence and brought him closer to the possibility of escape. Through it all, Tayan maintained a sense of hope. He knew that despair was the greatest enemy, and he refused to let it take hold. He kept his mind focused on the future, imagining the moment he would return to Ahioka and the village. That vision kept him moving, kept him enduring, and kept his spirit alive. Even when faced with exhaustion, hunger, or fear, he reminded himself that his journey was not yet over. Courage, he realized, was not only about facing immediate danger, it was about enduring hardship with dignity and determination. One day, Tayan saw an opportunity. The strangers were distracted, arguing among themselves about a trivial matter, their attention divided. He noticed a narrow path leading into the forest that seemed lightly guarded, a route that could allow him to move unnoticed. His heart raced, but his mind remained clear. This could be the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to act not recklessly but with careful planning. He studied the path, noting the obstacles and the best places to hide, preparing himself mentally for the difficult steps ahead. Tayan also began to communicate quietly with some of the other captives, offering small gestures of encouragement. Though words were few and careful, his presence brought them a sense of hope. They saw his strength and determination, and it inspired them to hold on, to endure. Even in the darkest moments, the spark of courage could be shared, and Tayan became a silent leader among them. He understood that leadership was not only about command, but about inspiring others through example, through calm, focused bravery in the face of fear. Night fell again and Tayan lay under the stars, thinking of Ahioka. He pictured her safe in the village, waiting, unaware of the challenges he faced. That image strengthened his resolve. He whispered a quiet promise to the night sky. He would not fail. He would endure, he would overcome, and he would return. His courage was no longer just for himself. It was for his sister, for the villagers, and for the honor of his people. It was a courage rooted in love, in duty, and in the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Tayan knew that the days ahead would test him more than any challenge so far. Yet he felt ready, not because he was fearless, but because he understood what courage truly meant. It meant facing the unknown with resolve, using wisdom as well as strength, and never losing sight of what mattered most. With every breath, every step, and every careful observation, he prepared himself for the trials yet to come, determined to survive, to protect, and to return. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. Tayan awoke with a renewed sense of determination. The days of captivity had tested him physically and mentally, but they had also strengthened his mind and spirit. He had observed the strangers carefully, learned their routines, and understood their weaknesses. Today, he decided, would be the day he acted. The moment had come to move with courage and intelligence, to take the steps necessary to return to Ahioka and the village he loved so dearly. He waited patiently for the right moment, knowing that haste could lead to failure. The strangers were preoccupied with their own concerns, arguing quietly among themselves about supplies and routes. Tayan noted every distraction, every opportunity to slip past their watchful eyes. He felt a familiar rush of adrenaline, but it was tempered by calm focus. His mind was clear, his heart steady, and his body ready. Every day of training, every lesson from his elders had led him to this point. Carefully, he began to move, keeping low to the ground and using the trees and shadows as cover. He communicated quietly with a few other captives, signaling that he would provide protection and guidance if they wished to follow. Some were too frightened, but a few trusted his judgment, and together they moved cautiously toward the edge of the camp. Every step required precision, every sound had to be measured, because a single mistake could endanger them all. Tayan's heart beat steadily, reminding him of the promise he had made to Ahioka. As they moved through the camp, Tayan recalled the paths he had observed during his time in captivity. There was a narrow trail leading into the forest, lightly guarded and offering natural cover. It was not easy. Jagged rocks, thick underbrush, and steep slopes made the journey challenging, but Tayan's training as a warrior had prepared him for difficult terrain. He guided the captives silently, encouraging them with soft words, reminding them to breathe and focus. "We will move together," he whispered. "Stay close and trust me." The first part of the escape required patience. The strangers were still nearby, moving in predictable patterns, but Tayan had already studied their behaviors. He waited for the moment when their attention was divided, then signaled the group to move. The shadows of the trees became their allies, hiding them from view as they crept through the underbrush. Tayan's knowledge of the forest, honed through years of exploration near his village, gave him confidence. He knew where to step, where to pause, and where the path would provide cover. Every step brought them closer to freedom, yet the tension remained high. Suddenly, a low snap of a branch echoed in the quiet morning. Tayan froze, his senses on high alert. One of the captives had stepped on it accidentally, but he quickly signaled them to remain calm. The strangers turned toward the sound, but their attention was momentarily distracted by a conversation in the distance. Tayan exhaled quietly and motioned for the group to continue, slower this time, more cautious. Each heartbeat felt loud in his chest, but he remained steady. Courage, he reminded himself, was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Hours passed as they moved through the dense forest, the sunlight filtering through the trees in patches. Tayan led the group with quiet confidence, navigating the twists and turns of the trail with precision. Occasionally, they paused to rest, hiding behind trees and rocks, always listening for the slightest sound of pursuit. Tayan's knowledge of survival skills proved invaluable. He knew which plants could provide water, which rocks could serve as shelter, and which paths would lead them away from the dangers of the strangers. Every decision was deliberate, every choice calculated. As evening approached, they reached a small stream, the sound of water a comforting reminder of the life and freedom waiting beyond their struggles. Tayan knelt by the water, taking a moment to drink and encouraging the others to do the same. He reminded them to stay quiet, to remain vigilant, and to prepare for the night ahead. The forest, though a place of cover, could also be dangerous, and he knew that careful observation was key. That night as they rested, Tayan kept watch, scanning the horizon for any signs of pursuit, while the captives slept nearby, trusting him completely. The following days were filled with constant movement and careful planning. Tayan led the group through hidden trails, avoiding main paths and areas that could expose them. He remained alert for any signs of the strangers, ready to adjust their route at a moment's notice. The journey was exhausting, but Tayan's determination never wavered. He reminded himself of Ahioka, imagining her waiting safely in the village, and the thought strengthened his resolve. Every step forward brought him closer to fulfilling the promise he had made. One afternoon, they came across a small clearing. It offered a moment of respite, a place where they could eat and rest without being immediately visible. Tayan used the opportunity to plan the next phase of their journey. He observed the movements of the forest, looking for patterns in the wildlife that might indicate danger. He taught the captives basic survival techniques, quietly sharing his knowledge to keep them safe. The experience strengthened the bonds among them, and Tayan realized that leadership was not just about guiding others, but inspiring confidence through example and wisdom. Yet despite the progress, challenges continued to arise. Steep hills, dense underbrush, and sudden weather changes tested their endurance. At times, Tayan had to find creative solutions to obstacles, using his knowledge of the terrain to find safer paths or ways to move more efficiently. One night, a sudden storm struck, turning the forest floor into a slippery maze of mud and fallen branches. Tayan guided the group carefully, ensuring that no one slipped or fell, and using his strength to help those who struggled. The storm tested their physical limits, but it also strengthened their resolve. Throughout the journey, Tayan remained calm under pressure, constantly assessing risks and making decisions to protect the group. He moved like a shadow through the forest, silent and observant, always aware of his surroundings. His focus never wavered, even when fatigue set in or when obstacles seemed insurmountable. He reminded himself that every step forward, no matter how difficult, was a step closer to Ahioka and the life he longed to return to. After several days of careful travel, they finally reached the edge of the forest near a river that flowed toward the valley of Tayan's village. The sight filled him with a mix of relief and renewed determination. They were closer than ever, but the final stretch would be the most dangerous. Tayan studied the riverbank, noting areas where they could cross safely and avoid detection. He prepared the group for the challenge ahead, emphasizing caution, teamwork, and patience. One misstep now could undo everything they had endured. That night, under the cover of darkness, Tayan led the group to the river. The water was cold and the current strong, but he moved with confidence, guiding each person across safely. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calculated. Tayan's knowledge, skill, and courage had carried them this far, and now they were on the threshold of freedom. As they reached the opposite bank, he paused for a moment, taking in the landscape and the stars above. They were not yet safe, but hope burned brighter than ever. Finally, as dawn approached, they began to move toward the familiar hills near Tayan's village. He recognized landmarks he had seen in his youth, small rocks, trees, and streams that marked the path home. His heart swelled with emotion, thinking of Ahioka waiting, of the village that had nurtured him, and of the promise he had made. Every step was a mixture of relief, joy, and cautious anticipation. They were so close, yet he remained vigilant, knowing that danger could still lurk ahead. As they neared the outskirts of the village, Tayan slowed the group, ensuring that no one would accidentally alert others to their presence. He carefully signaled them to stay quiet, moving forward himself to scout the area. The village appeared peaceful, yet he knew appearances could be deceiving. His mind was sharp, his senses attuned to every sound, every shadow. With careful observation, he ensured that the final steps of their journey would be safe and successful. Finally, Tayan stepped into the village, his heart pounding with anticipation. Ahioka appeared, running toward him with tears in her eyes. "Tayan," she cried, embracing him tightly. Relief, joy, and pride surged through him as he held his sister, knowing that he had fulfilled the promise he had made. The villagers emerged slowly, witnessing the courage and determination that had brought him back. Tayan had not only protected Ahioka but had led others to safety, demonstrating the strength of his spirit and the power of love and courage. Tayan stood at the edge of the village, his eyes sweeping across the familiar landscape. The sun was rising, casting warm light over the mountains and the fields where he had played as a child. Birds were beginning their morning songs, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and pine. It was a peaceful scene, but for Tayan it was more than that. It was home, and it was a symbol of everything he had fought to protect. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. Today, he would finally see Ahioka safe, and the village restored to normalcy after the harrowing events that had unfolded. Ahioka had run ahead, her small feet moving quickly over the familiar paths. When she saw Tayan standing there, her eyes widened with disbelief and joy. "Tayan," she cried, her voice carrying across the open space. Without thinking, she rushed toward him and he caught her in his arms. The warmth of her embrace, the softness of her small hands clutching his shoulders. It was the moment he had dreamed of through every night of captivity, every step of the dangerous journey, every challenge he had faced. Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with a profound sense of gratitude for the courage that had carried him through. The villagers had gathered cautiously, their eyes wide with amazement as they witnessed the reunion. Tayan had become a symbol of bravery and hope, not only to Ahioka but to everyone in the village. The elders approached him slowly, their faces lined with respect and concern. "You have shown great courage, Tayan," one elder said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Not only in facing danger but in protecting your family and guiding others safely. Your spirit has strengthened us all." Tayan bowed his head in acknowledgement, feeling both humility and pride. He knew that the journey had changed him, deepening his understanding of responsibility, sacrifice, and love. Ahioka clung to him, her tears flowing freely. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I thought I might never see you again." Tayan held her tightly, gently stroking her hair. "I promised I would protect you," he said softly. "No harm could reach you as long as I could stand and fight." That promise was my guide every step of the way. She looked up at him, her eyes full of admiration and trust. In that moment, Tayan realized that courage was not only about facing danger, but about inspiring confidence and hope in those you love. His actions had shown her the meaning of bravery in its truest form. The village slowly returned to its daily rhythm, but Tayan knew that life would not be quite the same. The events they had endured had left their mark, but they had also strengthened the bonds among the villagers. People were kinder, more aware of the importance of unity, and more appreciative of the courage and sacrifices required to protect one another. Tayan walked through the village with Ahioka by his side, greeting neighbors and friends. Everyone looked at him differently now, not only as a warrior but as a guardian, someone who had faced unimaginable challenges and returned not only alive but triumphant. Evening fell and Tayan found a quiet spot near the river where he had played as a child. The water reflected the colors of the sky, and he sat down with Ahioka beside him. She leaned against his shoulder, still processing the events of the past days. Tayan looked out at the flowing river, remembering the journey that had brought him back. He thought of the strangers, the trials, the moments of fear and courage, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He understood now that true courage was not only about physical strength, but about patience, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to those you love. As darkness settled over the village, Tayan stood under the stars, his mind reflecting on the journey. The stars reminded him of the stories his father had told him, stories of ancestors who had faced danger with honor and courage. He felt connected to them, to his heritage, and to the land that had shaped him. He realized that bravery was not about seeking glory or recognition. It was about standing firm when others could not, making choices for the greater good, and protecting what mattered most. His journey had tested him, but it had also revealed the strength of his spirit and the depth of his love for Ahioka and his people. The following days were filled with reflection and rebuilding. The villagers worked together to restore areas of the village that had been affected by the stranger's presence. Tayan helped wherever he could, but he also spent time teaching the younger warriors lessons he had learned during his captivity. He emphasized the importance of observation, strategy, patience, and protecting the innocent. The children listened with wide eyes, inspired by his stories of courage and determination. Ahioka watched her brother closely, learning from him not only about survival but about strength of character, loyalty, and love. One afternoon, as Tayan and Ahioka walked through the fields, she spoke quietly. Tayan, I will never forget what you did for me. You risked everything, even yourself, to protect me. I want to be brave like you someday. Tayan smiled, gently holding her hand. Bravery is not about never being afraid, Ahioka, he said. It is about doing what is right, even when you are afraid. Remember that and you will always be strong. She nodded, absorbing his words, and for the first time she felt a deeper understanding of courage and responsibility. Tayan also spent time with the elders, sharing insights from his experiences. He spoke of the importance of preparation, of observing and understanding threats, and of making decisions with both heart and mind. The elders listened attentively, recognizing that his experiences, though difficult, had made him wiser. They praised his resilience and the example he had set for the entire village. Tayan understood that his journey was not only about survival, but about contributing to the strength and knowledge of his people. As days turned into weeks, the village slowly returned to normalcy. Children played freely, the men and women resumed their work, and a sense of peace settled over the community. Yet, the memory of what had happened remained, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of courage, unity, and love. Tayan felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that he had fulfilled his promise to Ahioka and that he had helped guide others through danger. His heart was full, not with pride alone, but with a deep understanding of the power of dedication, resilience, and compassion. One evening, Tayan sat atop a hill overlooking the village, Ahioka by his side. The stars shone brightly, and the mountains stood tall and silent. He felt a sense of calm and fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, filled with fear and uncertainty, but it had also revealed the strength of his spirit. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, but the courage, love, and wisdom he had gained would guide him through anything. Ahioka leaned against him, and he smiled, grateful for her trust and the unbreakable bond they shared. The villagers often spoke of Tayan's bravery, recounting the story of how he had faced danger to protect his sister and guide others to safety. Children learned his story as a lesson in courage, sacrifice, and determination. But for Tayan, the greatest reward was not recognition or praise. It was the knowledge that Ahioka was safe, that the village remained strong, and that he had honored the promises he had made. His actions had become a legacy, one that would inspire others not only to be brave, but to act with love and responsibility in the face of danger. Even years later, Tayan would reflect on the events with a quiet sense of pride and humility. He would remember the fear, the challenges, and the moments of triumph, understanding that each step had shaped him into the person he had become. Ahioka grew up with a deep respect and admiration for her brother, carrying his lessons of courage and love into her own life. The village continued to thrive, strengthened by the experiences they had endured and the leadership Tayan had displayed. Tayan understood finally that true courage was not measured by battles won or enemies defeated, but by the willingness to stand for what is right, to protect those you love, and to face life's trials with integrity and determination. He had faced the unknown, risked everything for family, and returned stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. As he watched the sunset over the mountains with Ahioka's small hand in his, Tayan knew that he had fulfilled his destiny, not as a warrior seeking glory, but as a guardian, a protector, and a hero in the truest sense.